and hopefully as few false positives as possible for the sake of how damaging that could absolutely be. Hey there, this is Nate, and I'm here to talk about Cat1, Cat2, Cat3, and Cat4 pesticides. My name is Nate Winokur. I'm one of the founders of Bell Costa Labs, a testing lab, and I'm also a cannabis educator. So, what's the deal with Cat1, Cat2, Cat3, and Cat4? These terms get thrown around an awful lot, especially terms like Cat2 and Cat3 when it comes down to the trap market, the traditional or illegal market. The notion of what these categories are goes into a little bit of cannabis history, as well as figuring out where things maybe are meeting their original terms versus not, and we'll go into that in a little bit of detail as well. But for the most part, Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, Cat 4, people are using these terms to refer to different groups of pesticides. And these different groups of pesticides are all a concern when it comes down to things like what I do with cannabis testing. So, where do these terms come from? How does it work? Well, in California, it rolled out cannabis testing guidelines in 2018. Or, I'm sorry, it rolled out the guidelines before that, but it enacted cannabis testing in 2018. January 1st, 2018. We have phase one of testing. Phase one of testing rolled out, and I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but phase one of testing rolled out category one of the pesticide panel. Category one was all the most dangerous pesticides. The idea being that if any amount of these pesticides was found, that the batch would instantly fail based on the presence of these pesticides. So all the most dangerous pesticides, the labs had to show some level of proficiency in testing these. Around January 1st, 2018 was the idea. And as the batches needed to be tested, these Category 1 pesticides would have to be shown that they weren't present even till today. And if a Category 1 pesticide is in your cannabis, you would fail. Then number two, or rather phase two, came with the rollout of Category 2 pesticides. Category 2 pesticides are the second most dangerous category, if you will. What separates Category 1 pesticides from Category 2 pesticides in the state of California is that Category 2 pesticides have an action level. And an action level basically establishes an amount that could be present of a certain chemical before it would fail. So there are certain chemicals out there, like if people are familiar with things like myclobutanol, which is an equal 20, that type of chemical will cause a fail if it's there over a tenth of a microgram. So this is a very small amount, but there is an amount that you could have of a certain chemical where the product doesn't fail. And I see things within that threshold of being still technically safe all the time. Then moving from there, you have the notion that all of these Category 2 chemicals came out during phase 2 of testing. Phase 2 of testing came out in July 1st, 2018. So with phase 2 of testing, that brought Category 2 pesticides. So at this point, the pesticide panel rounded out to a clean 66 or so. So this pesticide panel and how it was put together it consisted of Category 1 pesticides, or Cat 1, and Category 2 pesticides, or Cat 2, which the Cat 2 had rolled out midway through July 1st, 2018. Then there was a phase 3. Bear in mind that phase 1 brought Cat 1. Phase 2 brought Cat2, and now Phase 3 brought new tests. However, it didn't add anything to the pesticide panel. Heavy metals, water activity, and mycotoxins were all added for Phase 3 of testing. Note that Phase 3, which came December 31st, 2018, note that Phase 3 ended up bringing with it a level of, Phase 3 brought with it compliance, a complete level of compliance, what we call a full panel. And it remains like that to that full panel even today. So, what is going on with Cat 3 pesticides? There are no Cat 3 pesticides. The term Cat 3 got interchanged with Phase 3 as simply meaning something that is completely, fully compliant. As the trap market or the black market referred to it, the Phase 3 chemicals or Cat 3 products essentially were fully, compliant. It meant all California testing standards for that type of product. A Cat 2 chemical or a Cat 2 product essentially to the trap market meant that anything goes. So even though Category 2 meant something completely different in the frame of regulations, Category 2 and Category 3 became ways that were essentially saying, or Cat 2 or Cat 3 became ways of saying non-compliant, which was Cat 2, could have any number of pesticides in this context. Cat 3 what meant to say fully compliant, and now we have something that's very, very new, which is Cat 4. So what happened was earlier this year, there was a major publication which came out with an article, and it discussed a number of issues in cannabis. Some of these issues had come from a lab which was somewhat unhinged and which was passing lots of stuff into the market which had pesticides in it. That was, that lab's gimmick, which is awful, but it happened. And they're fortunately gone and have been for a while, even before the article came out. And then the idea of other pesticides being introduced to the readers of the article, and these other pesticides weren't ones that were on the California panel. These were borrowed from elsewhere, things like food panel or tobacco panel. And so we have this notion of additional chemicals being now considered that were not a part of the original California cannabis testing panel. This new standard in terms of what's out there and what could be seen as a higher standard of testing, similar to how certain restaurants might be touting that they have a standard of cleanliness that's even above what the health department requires. There are versions of this kind of thing, and there are groups that certify this kind of thing. And there have been certain groups which have been grabbing the notion of Cat 4 and suggesting that this should be a higher standard for the industry. When you think of Cat, think of the fastest growing retailer out there, Catalyst. And the CEO of Catalyst is largely spearheading this whole notion of having cleaner products, and is even featuring through his many, many stores a notion of having a cleaner standard of product than even would exist based on California standards, and sees his platform as being an awesome way to potentially get the market out there to get the message out there to as many people as possible. So what we have is now an opportunity to look at standards that go above and beyond, which is awesome. Then you have obviously the notion of labs having to test products that are now in this, in the context of Cat 4. We have the notion of labs now needing to test things that are of this higher standard. So that's actually been something really interesting, because virtually overnight, numerous labs claim to have humongous panels, some virtually 300 chemicals deep, of chemicals that they suggested were able to test against cannabis. Now, there's a problem with this. Normally, a lab, any type of ISO accredited, well-to-do lab, would have to go through something called method validation. You have to essentially validate your ability as a lab to be able to test these types of chemicals. And the notion of testing 300 new chemicals overnight, even 200, even 100 new chemicals overnight is ludicrous. It took us virtually a year to validate the original panel, which was, dozens less than, the minimum number there was roughly 66. So that took us virtually a year to build as a lab that method. And so the notion of other labs coming out with a method that's validated for cannabis overnight seems like a really risky play on their part, if I may, because if you're suggesting that there are certain companies that have these chemicals without actually having a validated method to prove that these companies have these chemicals, I can only imagine the nightmares you'd be opening yourself up for, especially if these guys could claim damages and all of that stuff. So I think that the notion of going to the highest standard possible is really awesome in terms of concept, but I do feel like it needs to be rolled out well. So applause to the people who are doing it well, and to the labs who have just rushed out a method suggesting that they want to participate in this new standard. Just wanting to participate, but at the risk of putting bad science out there. Shame on them. That's definitely not how we should be doing things in this industry, and that's very damaging. And hopefully that practice, any practice really of cannabis labs who are trying to redefine how the industry could be or should be acting by being driven by profit rather than science. Shame on them. That's not cool and not fun for what I do either. So what are Cat1, Cat2, Cat3, and Cat4? They are measurements of pesticides. Cat1, Cat2, very real things in terms of regulations. They refer to different levels of pesticides in terms of toxicity. Cat1, most toxic. Cat2, second most toxic. The latter of the two categories has an action limit. That's done. Cat 3 isn't really a thing. It was a term that was interchanged with Phase 3, and that goes back to the 3 phases of different testing and rollout that happened back in 2018, where amongst other things, the state rolled out the various categories of pesticides at different times, as well as different parts of the testing panel. Cat 4, cat as in catalyst, is a new thought in terms of going above and beyond what the testing panel actually requires. And it's, like I said, a very interesting idea to go above and beyond. And while I'm not against it, I do want to see everybody who promises their opportunity to do this, to do it as well as possible, as ethically as possible. So, and hopefully as few false positives as possible for the sake of how damaging that could absolutely be to some of the companies out there. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts. I'd love to have everybody subscribe. So please do follow, and please let me know what you think. Thank you so much for listening.